On the evening of May 15, 2023, Emily Walker, a 28-year-old woman with a bright future ahead, stepped into her kitchen for a casual conversation with her mom. But little did anyone know, this would be the last time they'd see her. After a short phone call, she disappeared without a trace. For 2 long years, her family waited for answers. They had no idea that the truth was just around the corner, waiting to be uncovered. It was a regular evening, one of those quiet moments between mother and daughter. The kind where time slows down, everything feels comfortable and familiar. Emily chatted with her mom about her day. Nothing unusual. But then as the minutes passed, Emily's phone rang. The call was short, but it changed everything. Emily's voice, which had been light and warm, suddenly shifted, though her mom didn't pick up on it during their conversation. She said a few quick words, hung up, and without much explanation, told her mom she had to leave. Her mother didn't think much of it. Emily was independent and often left on a whim. But this time, something felt off. Emily left, her footsteps fading into the night. Her mom watched her go, not realizing that those would be the last steps she'd ever see her daughter take. The next morning, Emily didn't return home. Her phone went straight to voicemail. No text, no call, just complete silence. As the hours turned into a day, then 2, and finally 3, Emily's sudden absence grew more worrying. At first, her family didn't jump to conclusions. Maybe she was staying with a friend or something came up. But as the days passed, the silence became unbearable. Her mother, Lorraine, grew more anxious with each passing hour. Emily would never go this long without at least checking in. Something wasn't right. It was as if Emily had simply disappeared, and in that emptiness, the dread that started as a small feeling began to grow louder. 4 days after Emily disappeared, Lorraine couldn't ignore the fear any longer. She was about to call the authorities when a knock at the door interrupted her. It was the police, and they had terrible news. Emily had been found, but it wasn't the relief they had hoped for. Emily's body had been discovered, floating by the banks of a remote river. But it wasn't just that she was found, it was how she was found. The evidence suggested something far darker was at play, and the case quickly took a terrifying turn. Emily's family grew more concerned as each day passed without any word from her. Her friends and co-workers were equally puzzled. Emily, who was always in touch, had stopped responding to messages and hadn't been active on social media. Her phone, which was usually full of texts and notifications, was silent. It was as though she had simply vanished. The detectives got to work, looking into every part of Emily's life they could. They started with her phone records, her social media, and anything she had communicated in the days leading up to her disappearance. Everything seemed normal, even ordinary. There were no signs that anything was wrong. Her messages were light and casual, and there was nothing unusual about her conversations. No troubling phone calls, no signs of conflict or distress. But there was one detail that stood out: the phone call. The records showed that on the night she disappeared, Emily had received a call from a number that they couldn't trace. It had no name, no address, just a series of random numbers. Emily had always been careful about who she communicated with, so it was strange that she would pick up an unknown call, and even stranger that it would be the last contact anyone had with her. The detectives tried every method they could to trace the number. They ran it through every database, checked with phone providers, and even looked for any potential connections. But nothing came up. The number seemed to have no history. The call was brief, lasting only a few seconds. There was no voicemail left behind. The call ended just as quickly as it began, leaving the detectives with more questions than answers. The lack of information around the call became their biggest lead. Who had called Emily, and why? Why had she answered? And what was said in those few seconds? With no answers from the phone records, the detectives shifted their focus to people in Emily's life. Had she been involved with anyone who might have wanted to hurt her? Emily was known for being friendly, approachable, and well-liked. She didn't have any known enemies, and no one had mentioned anything that would suggest she was in danger. Her breakup with her ex-boyfriend had been amicable, and as far as anyone knew, there had been no tension or unresolved issues. Still, the detectives couldn't rule anything out. They started speaking with people who might have been on the outskirts of Emily's life. Acquaintances, co-workers, even people she had met briefly. They hoped someone might have noticed something unusual, something that would help explain her disappearance. Mark, Emily's ex-boyfriend, was one of the first people they interviewed. He was clearly upset, and his answers seemed genuine. He told them that they had split months ago, but had stayed on good terms and would occasionally meet for coffee. He hadn't heard from her in the days before she went missing, nor had he been in contact with her afterward. His alibi checked out, and the detectives didn't find anything to suggest he was involved. With no solid leads, the detectives returned to the phone records, hoping they might have overlooked something. They ran the number again, trying to trace it through cell towers and different phone networks, but all their efforts led nowhere. The more they looked into it, the more frustrating it became. The phone call was their only lead, and it was as elusive as Emily herself. Whoever had made that call had managed to cover their tracks. The detectives were no closer to finding an answer. The question still haunted them. Why had Emily been called? And more importantly, who had called her? 2 years had passed since Emily Walker disappeared, and her family was running out of hope. They'd tried everything, posting flyers, speaking with anyone who might have seen something, and keeping the case alive. But still, no answers. The silence was unbearable, and each day without progress only deepened their worry. Emily's family had endured long months of wondering where she was and what had happened, holding on to the faintest hope that one day the truth would come to light. Then on the second anniversary of Emily's disappearance, a surprising turn of events brought some light to the darkness. A man named David Thompson, who lived just a few blocks from Emily's house, came forward with something he had kept to himself until then. He had seen something that night that he hadn't been able to forget, and now he realized it might be the key to finding out what happened to Emily. David told the police that on the night Emily disappeared, he had been at home when he noticed her standing outside, talking to someone by the side of the road. There was a dark car parked near her, and she seemed to be speaking with the person in the car. David couldn't make out much of the conversation, but something about the situation stood out to him. He kept watching for a moment, but when he moved to get a better look, the car had already sped off, disappearing down the street. At the time, David didn't think much of it. It seemed like a casual conversation between two people, but now with everything that had happened, he realized it could be important. He had never come forward before because he hadn't believed his observation would matter. But after 2 years of silence, he knew he had to say something. David contacted the detectives, telling them everything he remembered about that night. The information wasn't much. A brief interaction, a dark car, a man David couldn't recognize. But it was something no one else had provided. The detectives took David's account seriously and began following up on the details he had given them. They revisited the area around Emily's house, trying to piece together a clearer timeline of what had happened. The car David had seen seemed to match a vehicle spotted in nearby surveillance footage, and this new lead gave them hope. As they continued their investigation, they reached out to people in the neighborhood, hoping to find someone who might have seen something else that night. Some neighbors recalled seeing the dark car parked on the street, while others remembered hearing a brief conversation between two people, though no one had thought it was unusual at the time. Despite these small clues falling into place, the identity of the man Emily had spoken to remained unknown. The detectives now had a fresh lead to follow, and the case began to shift in a new direction. Instead of focusing solely on Emily's past relationships, they now had to look into this stranger in the dark car. David's information had opened up a new avenue for the investigation. The detectives expanded their search, looking for any records that might match the description of the car or the man. They checked with local authorities, ran background checks, and combed through old reports. They kept searching, hoping that each new step would bring them closer to identifying who had been with Emily that night. Even though they still had no clear answers, the detectives could feel that they were on the right track. The case no longer seemed like an unsolvable mystery. With new details to follow, they had a renewed sense of purpose. Emily's family, though still devastated, felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. The clock had ticked on for 2 years, but now, with fresh eyes on the case, they could finally start to see a way forward. Detectives tracked down the registration of the car seen near Emily on the night she disappeared. To everyone's surprise, it was registered to Emily's ex-boyfriend, Brian Miller. Until now, his name had never come up in the investigation. Brian had always stayed in the background of Emily's life. They had been in an on and off relationship for over a year, but they had broken up months before she went missing. From the outside, it seemed like a clean break. They had ended things, and both had moved on. Or so it seemed. But as detectives looked more closely at Brian, they found things they hadn't expected. Brian wasn't as distant from Emily's life as everyone thought. He had a habit of being controlling during their relationship. He would often check in on her, ask where she was, and who she was with. While Emily never mentioned anything serious about it to her family, those who knew her said Brian could be overbearing at times. The detectives soon found that Brian had tried to contact Emily in the weeks before she vanished. It wasn't just a casual message here and there. It became clear he was trying to get back into her life. At first it seemed like simple check-ins, but the more they looked, the more it appeared Brian was unwilling to let go of the relationship. Emily had moved on, but Brian's feelings hadn't faded. This revelation changed everything. The breakup that had seemed final now looked much more complicated. Emily's family had no idea that Brian's attempts to reconnect with her had continued long after they thought the relationship was over. It made the detectives question whether his feelings for Emily played a part in her disappearance. With this new information, everything started to make sense. The picture of Emily's life, which had seemed clear, suddenly had a dark spot in the middle of it. Emily's disappearance no longer seemed like a random event. It felt more like a situation that had been building quietly under the surface, with Brian being at the center of it. As the investigation continued, the police found some surprising evidence at Brian Miller's house. Among the things they discovered were photos of Emily, some from when they were together and others taken after their breakup. There were also letters, some that Emily had written to Brian, and some that he had kept hidden, ones she never received. One of the most important finds was an old phone. It wasn't just any phone, it had messages from Emily, sent just days before she vanished. The messages were short, nothing that stood out, but they showed that Emily had still been in contact with Brian. This wasn't the first time the detectives realized that Brian hadn't truly let go of Emily. As they looked into it further, they discovered that Brian had been trying to reach out to Emily for a long time. He had sent her multiple messages in the months leading up to her disappearance, but Emily had ignored them. She had made it clear that their relationship was over, but Brian didn't accept that. He kept pushing, trying to get her back, and it became clear that he had been planning to force her to reconnect with him. When the detectives pieced everything together, they found that on the night Emily disappeared, Brian had contacted her, pretending to want closure. Emily, wanting to move forward with her life, agreed to meet him, thinking it would help her get past their past. But Brian had other plans. He took her to a secluded area, away from everything she knew. Once they were there, Brian attacked her. In a moment of rage, he took her life. Emily, who had hoped to put her past behind her, became the victim of someone who couldn't accept the end of their relationship. On August 5th, 2025, Brian Miller was arrested. When the police questioned him, he confessed to the crime. He admitted that he had killed Emily that night after convincing her to meet him. He had been trying to force her to return to him for months, and when that didn't happen, he chose to end it in the most tragic way possible. With Brian's confession, the case was finally solved. The long wait for answers was over, and Emily's family could finally start to find some closure. Emily Walker's story is one of heartbreak and loss. Her family will never fully recover from the pain of her absence, but they now have the truth, something they had longed for since the day she disappeared. 2 years of uncertainty, of questions that seemed impossible to answer, finally gave way to the truth. It's a painful reminder that sometimes justice comes after a long wait. Though the tragedy can never be undone, Emily's family can begin to heal, knowing what really happened that night. This story serves as a reminder that even when it feels like the answers will never come, there is always hope. In the end, the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface, even if it takes time. Thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts or theories, feel free to share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories.